The afternoon my parents tried to steal my billionaire grandfather's $8 million penthouse, I was standing in the hallway watching my mother wrap a Picasso in a tea blanket. "Watch the corners, for God's sake," she hissed, her nails digging into the gilded frame like she was holding on for dear life. My father was on the other side of the room, trying to jimmy open the glass case that held a Qing dynasty vase my grandfather had bought at a flea market in the 90s for $300. The screwdriver screeched against the lock like a dying animal. I gripped my phone in my pocket. The screen was still lit with the text my grandfather had sent me an hour ago, Ivy, "I'm transferring the penthouse to your name. Don't tell anyone. Not even your parents, Ivy, don't just stand there." My mother shot me a look over her shoulder, her ponytail whipping around. "Go unplug the hallway cameras. The security in this building is insane." I didn't move. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Central Park sprawled green and gold in the October sun. The skyline of Manhattan glittered beyond it, the kind of view people wrote songs about, the kind of view my parents had been salivating over for 30 years. My grandfather had lived here since before I was born. And now, less than 24 hours before he was set to announce his will from a hospital bed uptown, my mother and father were treating this place like a going-out-of-business sale. "Mom." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "What are you doing getting what's yours?" My dad didn't even look up. He'd finally popped the glass case open and was reaching inside with the kind of reverence he usually reserved for golf trophies. The old man's lost his mind. He wants to donate everything to some Asian arts foundation. Everything. We're his blood, Ivy. His only son. His only grandchild. "He's not dead yet," I said. My mother's hands paused on the painting. For half a second, something flickered across her face, guilt, maybe, or the ghost of it. Then she zipped the painting into her hiking backpack and straightened up. Which is exactly why he can still change his mind. She smoothed her blouse, the one she'd worn to every one of my school plays and every one of my father's business dinners. The one she'd probably worn to the courthouse when she'd signed those papers I didn't know about yet. "Ivy, all of this should have come to you anyway. You're his only heir. Legally, morally." Legally, they loved that word. The same way they'd loved it when they'd opened that offshore account in my name when I was 12. The same way they'd loved it when they'd siphoned off 2/3 of my education trust, to buy a vacation home in Miami and my mother's new Porsche. Legally, I repeated. You know what else is legal, Mom? Breaking and entering. Grand larceny. Felony charges that come with a mandatory minimum sentence. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and held it up, the screen still glowing with my grandfather's message. "This whole building has a security system that pings the NYPD the second an unauthorized door opens." My father finally turned around. He was still wearing his golf polo, the collar popped up like he'd just come from the 19th hole. His face was the one I'd seen 1,000 times, the one that showed up when a business deal went south, when a stock tanked, when I told him I wanted to major in art history instead of finance. "Go ahead," he said, spreading his arms wide. "Call them. And then when your grandfather has a heart attack from the stress, we make the evening news, and the only thing you inherit is a lawsuit that lasts longer than your 20s. That what you want?" He stepped closer. I could smell the cigarettes on his breath, the same brand he'd been smoking since I was a kid, the one my mother had begged him to quit for 20 years. "You think he actually see a residential about you, Ivy? That man walked out on your grandmother before you were born." 4 wives, 3 divorces, and a lifetime of pretending family didn't matter. He didn't come to your birth. He didn't come to your graduation. He sent a check. That's all he's ever sent. He jabbed a finger at my shoulder, not hardy, but hardy enough to make me step back. I'm the one who paid for your school. 8 years of private education. Who do you think wrote those checks? My back hit the marbly wall in the foyer. Cold seeped through my shirt, through my skin, all the way down to my bones. Somewhere behind me, my mother was still rifling through the study, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a metronome counting down to something I wasn't ready to name. Don't fight with her, she called out, her voice muffled. The service elevator's here. We need to move. And that's when I almost laughed that they had no idea. Not a single clue that my grandfather hadn't transferred the penthouse to me because he loved me, or because he wanted to make amends, or because he'd suddenly developed a conscience on his deathbed. He'd done it because he'd been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 3 weeks ago, and he needed someone he could trust, someone who wasn't them, to carry out the last thing he had left to do. He'd picked me up fine. I walked past my father into the study and root wrapping the vase in bubble wrap, my fingers moving automatically. But I want something in return. My father's eyes narrowed. My mother stopped what she was doing, her hand frozen mid-reach for a stack of letters on the desk. Don't touch the safe in the master bedroom, I said. It's got old photographs and letters. Personal stuff. Worthless to anyone but me. They exchanged a look, that quick, silent communication they'd perfected over 30 years of marriage and 26 years of parenting me. Then my father nodded. Deal. They left an hour later, hauling 2 cars worth of what they thought was priceless art and antiques. I watched from the window as they loaded the last box into the trunk of my mother's Porsche, the one paid for with my tuition money, and drove off toward the West Side Highway. The penthouse felt hollow when they were gone. Half-empty shelves, walls where paintings had hung, the faint smell of my mother's perfume lingering in the hallway like a ghost. I walked out onto the terrace. The sun was setting over the Hudson, turning the river into liquid gold. A breeze came in from New Jersey, CL and clean, riding the scent of autumn, and somewhere far away, a barbecue grill. My phone rang at exactly 6:15. Did they leave? My grandfather's voice was thinner than I remembered. But it was still steady. Still sharp. Still the voice of a man who'd built an empire from nothing and wasn't about to let anyone take it from him, least of all his own son. They left, I said. Good. On his end of the line, I could hear the faint beep of hospital monitors, the distant sound of a nurse's voice. Then we can start the real plan. Ivy, the documents are in the second drawer of your nightstand. Mr. Collins will be there at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Before that, don't let anyone know you're still in the building. I walked back inside, past the empty study, past the walls, into the master bedroom. The second drawer of the nightstand was unlocked. Inside was a thick manila folder with the gold-embossed logo of Collins and Associates, the law firm my grandfather had used for 40 years. I opened it. And the world tilted sideways. This wasn't a property transfer. This was a complete file, over 200 pages of financial records, offshore account statements, notarized documents, and sworn affidavits. Every single one of them tracing a pattern of fraud, embezzlement, and attempted forgery that my parents, had been running for over a decade. The release document was dated 15 years ago. I was 11 years old that year. The year my parents sent me to boa riding school in Switzerland. The year they told me it was for my own good, that they wanted me to have the best education money could buy. What they didn't tell me was that the same year, they'd opened a trust in my name and drained 2/3 of it to fund their own lifestyle. The signatures were there, in black and white. My mother's elegant cursive. My father's blocky capitals. The same handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and permission slips and reports cards they'd signed with a flourish, never once looking me in the eye. "They've been stealing from you since you were a child," my grandfather said. His voice came through the speaker, quiet and tired. "I've been watching them for years, waiting for the right moment to give you the truth." I flipped to the last page. A document dated last year. A forged medical affidavit claiming my grandfather had dementia, signed by a doctor my parents had paid off, designed to give them legal control over his entire estate. My mother's signature was on it. So was my father's fingerprint. They were never after the penthouse, Ivy. My grandfather's voice cracked, just a little. They were after your whole life. I closed the folder and set it back in the drawer. Outside, New York was lighting up for the night. The Chrysler Building blinked gold and silver. The streetlights on Fifth Avenue flickered on, one by one, like a runway leading somewhere I couldn't see yet. I thought about the 11-year-old girl who'd cried herself to sleep in a dormitory in Switzerland, alone on Christmas Eve, drinking instant hot chocolate from a vending machine while her parents called once, briefly, to say they were busy. I thought about the 15-year-old who'd come home for break to find her room turned into a home office. I thought about the 22-year-old who'd graduated with honors and a mountain of student loans, because somehow, the trust fund that was supposed to cover her education had simply disappeared. "Grandpa," I said, my voice shaking for the first time. "What do I do tomorrow morning?" he said. "You meet with Mr. Collins. And you decide how much justice you want." The line went dead. I stood in the middle of the empty penthouse, surrounded by BA walls and stolen art and a view worth $8 million, and I thought about the one thing my parents had never been able to take from me. My choice. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to my grandfather. "I'm ready." 3 dots. Ape read. Then his reply, "I know you are Ivy. You always have been, I didn't sleep that night." I sat in my grandfather's old armchair, the one he'd left behind because it was too heavy to move, and watched the city breathe. Cabs honking on 8th Avenue. A group of tourists laughing on the corner. The hot dog vendor packing up his cart and heading home. At 7 a.m., I showered, dressed, and walked into the study to wait for Mr. Collins. At 9:50, my mother called. Ivy. Her voice was all business. "Noah RMTH, we need to talk about what happened yesterday. Your father and I think we were a little hasty. We want to make things right." I leaned against the window, watching the clouds drift over Central Park. "Do you, Mom?" "Of course we do. We're your parents. We love you." "You know what I loved?" I said. "I loved the Christmas you sent me a plane ticket to come home and then canceled it the day before. I loved the year you forgot my birthday because you were in Cabo. I loved every single time you told me I was being dramatic when I asked where my tuition money went." Silence. At 10 o'clock, I said, "I'm meeting with my grandfather's lawyer. If you have anything to say, you can say it to him." I hung up and turned off my phone. At exactly 10, the doorbell rang. Mr. Collins walked in, tall and graying and carrying a briefcase that looked like it had seen decades of battles. Behind him were 2 men in dark suits, investigators, I guessed, Or maybe process servers. Ms. Chen, Mr. Collins said, shaking my hand. Your grandfather asked me to give you this. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. Ivy, asterisk, if you're reading this, you've already done the rightest party. You stood up. Now comes the party where you decide who you want to be, asterisk, asterisk. Your parents have spent 26 years trying to tell you your story. They've lied, they've stolen, they've manipulated. But stories belong to the people who tell them, and I'm giving you back the pen, asterisk, asterisk. Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you, asterisk, asterisk, love, asterisk, asterisk, grandpa, asterisk. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my pocket. Mr. Collins, I said, I'm ready. We sat down at the dining room table. He laid out the documents. The evidence. The affidavits. The list of charges that could be filed against my parents if I chose to press four-way road. Your grandfather's condition is that if you choose not to file, the penthouse goes to charity, Mr. Collins said. You'll walk away with nothing. I looked out the window at the city I'd grown up in, the city my parents had tried to sell out from under me, the city that was about to become either my sanctuary or my battleground. I have one question, I said. Mr. Collins nodded. What happens to them legally? He opened another file. They could face up to 15 years, civil suits could take everything they have. Financially, they'll be rooting from zero. I thought about my mother's Porsche, my father's golf clubs, the house in Connecticut they'd bought with money that should have been mine. Okay, I said. Where do I sign? And I picked up the pen. The week after I signed those papers, I didn't leave the penthouse. Not once. I told myself it was because I was organizing my grandfather's things, sorting through 60 years of letters and photographs and receipts that would never matter to anyone but me. But really, I was hiding. My phone stayed on silent. The door chain stayed latched. Every time the elevator chimed in the hallway, my heart slammed against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. My parents had called 47 times between them. I knew because I counted the voicemails without listening to them. My mother's voice came through in clipped, strained fragments. Asterisk, Ivy, we need to talk about this like adults. Ivy, you're making a terrible mistake. Ivy, your father is so upset he can't sleep. Asterisk, my father's messages were shorter, angrier, punctuated by the sound of him hitting something, a wall, a table, maybe his own fist against his forehead. Asterisk, you want to destroy this family. Fine. But don't you dare think you can come crawling back when you realize what you've done. Asterisk, I didn't listen to any of them. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way my mother's hands had trembled when she'd wrapped that painting. Not with guilt. With hunger. On day 3, I called my grandfather's hospital room. A nurse answered and told me he was sleeping, but that he'd left me a message. Ask Mr. Collins about the other file. I didn't know what that meant, but I called the law firm anyway. Mr. Collins didn't answer. His assistant said he was in court, but that he'd left an envelope for me at the front desk if I wanted to pick it up. I read at my reflection in the elevator doors and made a decision. I put on jeans and a sweatshirt. I pulled my hair back. I walked out of the penthouse for the first time in 72 hours, and I didn't look back until the elevator doors closed and I was headed down. The lobby of my grandfather's building was all marble and gold, and security guards who nodded at me like they'd known me my whole life. I smiled back and kept walking, past the doorman and the potted palms and the enormous water feature that cost more to maintain than most people's rent. Out on Fifth Avenue, the air hit me like a slap. It was late October now, and the city had turned cold and sharp. I pulled my sweatshirt tighter and walked east, through the park, past the runners and the dog walkers and the families pushing strollers, all of them going somewhere, all of them living their lives like nothing had changed. Because for them, nothing had died. I picked up the envelope from Collins's office on Pennsylvania Arcade Avenue. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, with a date and an address. No explanation. Just a time, tomorrow, 4 p.m. An address in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. I went home and spent the rest of the day pacing the penthouse, trying to figure out what my grandfather was doing. He'd always been like this, playing chess when everyone else was playing checkers, moving pieces around the board without telling anyone his strategy until the very end. It had made him a fortune. It had also made him a lot of enemies. I wondered sometimes if that was why he'd never let himself get close to anyone, why he'd married 4 times and divorced 4 times and spent most of his life alone in this enormous apartment with nothing but his art and his books and his silence. But he'd let me in. Somehow, in the last year of his life, he'd decided I was the one he could trust. And I didn't want to let him down. At 3:45 the next afternoon, I took the subway to Brooklyn. The address led me to a row of brownstones in a quiet part of Ca Gardens, the kind of street where people waved at each other from front porches and kids drew chalk pictures on the sidewalk. I knocked on the door, and a woman answered, gray-haired, soft-faced, wearing an apron dusted with flour. Ivy Chen. She said. I nodded. I've been expecting you. I'm Lydia. Your grandfather told me all about you. She led me inside. The brownstone was warm and cluttered in the best way, books stacked on every surface, plants trailing over windowsills, the smell of something baking in the kitchen. We sat in the living room, and Lydia poured tea from a pot that looked like it had been in her family for generations. She didn't rush. She didn't explain. She just let me sit and breathe and look at the photographs on her mantelpiece. There was one I couldn't stop staring at, a young man in a military uniform, grinning at the camera with the kind of easy confidence that comes from having no idea what the world is about to throw at you. It was my grandfather. He looked maybe 22. And standing next to him, her arm linked through his, was a girl with dark hair and the same soft smile as the woman pouring my tea. That's my mother, Lydia said. Your grandfather's first fiancée. Before your grandmother. Before all of it. I set down my teacup. He never told me. He wouldn't have. Lydia sat across from me, folding her hands in her lap. Your grandfather is a man who believes in keeping things close to the chest. But he asked me to tell you this party. He said you need to hear it. Then she told me a story I hadn't known. The girl in the photograph had been named Yuki. She'd met my grandfather during the war, in a hospital in the Philippines where he'd been stationed, and she'd been working as a nurse. They'd fallen in love quickly, the way people do when they're young and red and the world is falling apart. He'd promised to marry her, to bring her back to New York, to build a life with her. And then his orders had changed, and he'd been sent to Japan, and he'd lost her address and her phone number and every way of reaching her. He'd spent 3 years looking. But it was the 50s, and the war had scattered people like leaves in a storm, and eventually he'd given up and married my grandmother and root the empire that would consume the rest of his life. But he'd never stopped looking for Yuki. In the 70s, long after my grandmother had left him, he'd hired private investigators. In the 80s, he'd found out she'd survived the war and emigrated to the United States and married an American man. In the 90s, he'd tracked down her daughter. That daughter was Lydia. She never told him anything, Lydia said. My mother had built a new life. She didn't want to revisit the old one. But she did ask him for one thing. Which was, Lydia smiled. She asked him to take care of her if he could. Not with money, she never wanted his money. But with kindness. With a place to go if the world ever got too hard. She gestured around the brownstone. He bought this house for us when my father died. He paid for my kids' college tuition. He gave us a life. He never once asked for anything in return. I looked at the photographs again. The young soldier. The smiling nurse. The girl he'd promised to marry 60 years ago, when the world was a different place entirely. That he's not the man my parents think he is, I said softly. No, Lydia agreed. He's the man who would have done anything for the woman he loved. And he's the man who has been doing everything for you. I didn't ask her what that meant. She could see it in my face, the exhaustion, the fear, the weight of everything I'd been carrying. She took my hand and squeezed it gently. You're not alone in this, Ivy. He made sure of that. He made sure there were people who would have your back, even if he couldn't be there himself. I stayed until the tea went cold. When I finally got up to leave, Lydia pulled me into a hug, the kind of hug that smells like flour and soap and something unspoken. I almost cried. I didn't, because I was still holding on to the part of myself that had learned not to show weakness, but I wanted to. She let me go and pressed a small box into my hand. He asked me to give you this, she said. He said you'd know what to do with it. I opened the box on the subway ride back. Inside was a key. Not a key to anything in the penthouse, I'd already memorized every lock in that place. This was an older key, tarnished brass, the kind that opened something heavy and old. On a piece of paper folded underneath it was an address and a single line, asterisk. The lawyer isn't always the answer, Ivy. Sometimes it's the person who loved you first, asterisk. That night, I was standing in the penthouse kitchen, making myself a cup of tea and trying to make sense of everything, when my buzzer rang. I froze. The penthouse door had a direct line to the building's intercom, and I told the doorman not to let anyone up. But there, on the security monitor, was a face I recognized. Not my mother. Not my father. My grandmother. She was standing in the lobby in an enormous coat, clutching a handbag like a shield, and she was looking directly into the camera with the exact same expression I'd seen on my mother's face every time she'd told me I was being dramatic. Ivy, my grandmother's voice crackled through the intercom, let me up. We need to talk. I hesitated. My grandmother and I had never been close. She'd left my grandfather decades ago, remarried, moved to California, and really acknowledged my existence except for the annual check that showed up on my birthday. She'd never called me. She'd never visited. But there she was. And she'd come all the way from San Francisco. I buzzed her up. She walked into the penthouse like she owned it, hanging her coat on a chair and surveying the half-empty rooms with the dispassionate eye of a former resident. He let it go to seed, she said, running a finger over the mantelpiece. Never did have any taste in furniture. Grandma, I said, why are you here? She turned to face me. She was older than I remembered, her hair silver and close-cropped, her face lined with the kind of sharp wrinkles that come from a lifetime of telling people exactly what you think. But her eyes were clear, and they were locked onto mine with an intensity that made me want to step back. Because your mother called me, she said. And because I've been waiting 30 years to tell you the truth about this family. She opened her bag and pulled out a folder, thinner than the one Mr. Collins had given me, but similar RLY official. She laid it on the table between us. Your grandfather isn't the saint you think he is, she said. And your parents aren't the only ones who've been hiding things. I didn't open the folder. I just stood there, staring at it, feeling the weight of another secret pressed down on my shoulders. What are you trying to say? I asked. I'm saying that before you destroy your parents, you should know what they were trying to protect. What I was trying to protect. She pushed the folder toward me. Open it, Ivy. And then decide what kind of future you actually want. I looked at the folder. Then I looked at the key in my pocket, the one from Lydia. Then I thought about my grandfather, lying in a hospital bed, fighting the one battle he couldn't win with money or power. I opened the folder. And inside, I found the missing piece of a puzzle I didn't even know I'd been building. The folder my grandmother handed me smelled like lavender and old paper, like the inside of a drawer that hadn't been opened in decades. I set it on the dining room table and read at it for a long time before I even touched the cover. Sit down, my grandmother said. You're going to want to sit down. I didn't sit. I couldn't. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, someone who was watching this scene from far away, someone who wasn't about to have her entire understanding of her family dismantled for the second time in 2 weeks. Just tell me, I said. I don't need the folder. Just tell me. She took a breath. She was still standing by the mantelpiece, her hand resting on the marble like she was steadying herself, and for a moment she looked less like the distant grandmother I remembered and more like an old woman who had kept a secret for too long. I was the one who pushed your father, she said. I was the one who told him to take the money. I blinked. What if your grandfather had already cut your father out of the will by the time you were born? Did you know that? She shook her head. Of course you didn't. He didn't tell anyone. But I knew. I was still his wife then, even if only on paper. I saw the documents. He'd disinherited his own son because your father refused to go into the family business. Because he wanted to be a golfer, of all things. A professional golfer. I thought about my dad's golf clubs, his weekend trips to Connecticut, the way he'd always talked about his swing like it was the most important thing in the world. I'd never thought of it as a career. I thought of it as a hobby. An obsession. The thing he did to escape the house. I tried to protect him, my grandmother said. I thought if I could help him build something for himself, he wouldn't need your grandfather's approval. So I told him about the trust. The one in your name. My stomach dropped. You told him to steal from me. I told him to borrow from you, she corrected RPLY. I told him to take a small portion, invest it wisely, and pay it back before you ever needed it. I thought he could turn it into enough money to make his own life. His own career. His own everything. But he didn't pay it back. No. Her voice cracked on the word. He didn't. Because he got greedy. Because he got red. Because once you start down that road, there's no stopping. He took more. And more. And then your mother found out, and instead of stopping him, she joined him. I sat down. Not because I wanted to, but because my legs finally gave out. So this whole time, I said slowly, you knew. You knew what they were doing, and you let it happen. My grandmother looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something like regret in her eyes. I thought I was protecting my son. I thought if I stayed quiet, I could keep the family together. I didn't realize what I was letting them do to you until it was too late. Too late, I repeated. I was 12 years old. I know. I was alone in Switzerland. On Christmas Eve. Drinking hot chocolate from a vending machine. She flinched. I know, Ivy. I know. And I've spent 15 years trying to figure out how to make it right. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to throw the folder across the room and tell her to get out of my life and never come back. But I didn't. Because underneath the anger, underneath the betrayal, there was something else I couldn't shake, the way she'd said trying to make it right, the way her hands were shaking. The way she'd flown 3,000 miles to stand in this penthouse and tell me a truth that could only make her look worse. Why now? I asked. Why didn't you tell me before? Because your grandfather found out, she said. About a year ago. He'd been watching your parents for years. He'd always suspected something was off. But it wasn't until he got sick that he sta root digging in your nest. And when he found out what they'd done, he called me. He told me that if I didn't come clean to you, he would. She walked toward me, her footsteps slow and deliberate, and knelt down in front of my chair. She looked small down there, fragile, nothing like the imperious woman who'd walked in an hour ago. I was going to take this secret to my grave, she said. I'm old, Ivy. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've lost a lot of things I loved. But I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to lose the chance to apologize. I looked at her for a long time. Then I opened the folder. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, handwritten, in my grandmother's looping cursive. Addressed to me, dated from the year I was 12 through the year I turned 18. Each one telling me she was sorry. Each one explaining, in different ways, that she'd made a terrible mistake and she wanted to fix it. Each one never sent. The last one was dated just 2 months ago. It said *Ivy****, I'm sending this one even if you never read it. I'm sending it because I need to say it out loud, even if only on paper. Your grandfather is dying, and I am finally learning what it means to lose someone you love. Not the romantic kind. The kind that comes from years of stubbornness and pride and all the things you thought mattered more than the people who actually did, ***, I am so sorry. For everything. For the party I played. For the silence. For every Christmas I didn't call, every birthday I missed, every moment I let my pride keep me from the only grandchild I have, ***. If you ever want to see me, I'll be here. If you don't, I'll understand. But I need you to know that I love you. I always have. I just didn't know how to say it, ***. I closed the folder and looked up at my grandmother. She was still kneeling on the floor, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes wet. You should have sent these, I said. I know. You should have called. I know. You should have done something, anything, instead of just writing letters and leaving them in a drawer. She nodded. I know, Ivy. And I can't undo any of it. But I can stand here and tell you the truth. And I can promise you that whatever happens with your parents, I'll be on your side. Not theirs. Yours. I reached down and helped her up. She was lighter than I expected, her bones fragile under her coat, and I realized for the first time how old she really was. How much time had passed since the grandmother I remembered had been a force of nature, impervious and untouchable. Why did you leave him? I asked suddenly. My grandfather. Why did you leave? She looked at me, and for a second, something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt. Not regret. Something else, something deeper and darker and sadder. Because he loved someone else, she said. He always loved someone else. And I was too proud to stay and watch. I thought about the photographs in Lydia's brownstone. The young soldier and the nurse. The promise he'd made and the one he'd broken. 60 years of carrying that loss, that love, that unfinished story. He never stopped looking for her, I said. The woman in the photograph. My grandmother nodded. He never did. And I knew that when I married him. I knew it, and I married him anyway, because I was young and foolish and I thought love could change things. She smiled, a small sad smile. It didn't. But I think he loved me in his own way. I think he loved me as much as he was capable of loving anyone after her. We stood there in the half-empty penthouse, two women connected by a man who had broken both their hearts in different ways, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something like understanding. So what happens now? I asked. My grandmother reached into her bag and pulled out a small address book. There's someone you need to meet. Someone your grandfather never told you about. Another secret, another truth, she corrected. And this one might be the hardest one to hear. I looked at the address book, then at the key in my pocket, then at the letters on the table. My head was spinning with information, with secrets, with the weight of a family that had been lying to each other for decades. I don't know if I can take any more truths tonight, I said. My grandmother nodded. I know. But you don't have to do it tonight. You don't have to do it alone. I'm here, Ivy. For the first time in your life, I'm really here. She reached out and took my hand, and I let her. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was steady. Let me stay, she said. Just for tonight. Let me make you dinner. Let me be your grandmother for a little while. I looked at her. At the woman who'd let my parents steal from me. At the woman who'd written 60 letters she'd never sent. At the woman who'd flown across the country because she was finally ready to admit she'd been wronged. I nodded. Okay. She made spaghetti. It was terrible, overcooked and undersalted, exactly the kind of food you'd expect from a woman who hadn't cared for herself in 30 years. But we ate it together at the dining room table, the one that still had the marks of my father's screwdriver on the lock, and we talked about things that weren't heavy. The weather. The view. The way the city looked at night, all those lights and lives and stories stacked on top of each other. It was the first meal I'd shared with anyone since this whole thing sta root. And for a few hours, it didn't feel like a war zone. It felt like a home. After dinner, my grandmother fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in a throw blanket I'd found in the hall closet. I stood by the window and watched her breathe, slow and steady, the kind of sleep that comes from exhaustion and honesty and the release of a secret held too long. I thought about the key in my pocket. The address in Brooklyn. The letters I still hadn't fully processed. The parents who were probably pacing the floor in Connecticut right now, wondering if their daughter was going to destroy them. I thought about my grandfather, alone in a hospital bed, giving me pieces of his life like they were puzzle pieces, trusting me to put them together. And I thought about the choice I'd made in that law office, the one I'd been so sure of. I still believed in it. I still believed in justice. In accountability. in not letting people steal your life and walk away like they'd done nothing wrong. But I was rooting to understand that justice and revenge weren't the same thing. That truth and forgiveness weren't opposites. That the people who hurt you could also be the people who loved you, and that untangling all of that was going to take longer than I'd thought. I pulled the key out of my pocket and turned it over in my palm. The brass was warm against my skin, worn smooth by years of being held. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow, I'd go to the address. I'd meet the person my grandmother wanted me to meet. Tonight, I'd let myself rest. I pulled the blanket up over my grandmother's shoulders and went to my room. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in days, I slept without dreaming that the address my grandmother had given me was in Queens, not Brooklyn, and it took me 3 subway trains and a bus to get there. The neighborhood was nothing like the one where my grandfather's penthouse sat. No marbly lobbies, no doormen, no views of Central Park. Just row after row of brick apartment buildings with fire escapes rusting in the rain, corner bodegas with flickering neon signs, and the constant hum of the elevated train rattling overhead. I found the building at the end of a quiet street, tucked between a laundromat and a shuttered deli. The buzzer was broken, so I pushed the front door open and climbed 3 flights of stairs to a door with a faded number and a welcome mat that said, "Come back with a WA rant." I knocked. The woman who opened the door was in her late 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a loose bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. She was wearing a sweater that had seen better decades and a pair of slippers with bunny faces on the toes. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she smiled. "You look just like her," she said. "Your grandmother sent me a photo, but it doesn't do you justice. Come in, come in. I've been waiting for you for a long time." Her apartment was small and cluttered in the way that only a lifetime of accumulation can make it. Bookshelves crammed with paperbacks, stacks of newspapers on every surface, a kitchen counter covered in half-empty jars of spices, and a teapot that looked like it had been there since the 70s. But there were photographs everywhere, on the walls, on the shelves, tucked into the edges of every mirror and frame, and in every single one of them, I saw the same face. My father. Young. Happy. Smiling like he didn't have a care in the world. His arm around this woman, his face pressed against hers, the kind of closeness that told a story I'd never known. Sit down, she said, gesturing to a worn armchair that groaned when I lowered myself into it. "I'm Alice. And before you ask, yes. I'm your father's mother." I read at her. My grandmother, the one who'd fed me over spaghetti last night, had told me she was my only living grandmother. My father's mother had died before I was born, or so I'd been told. That was the story. The one I'd believed my entire life. "You're his mother," I repeated slowly. "My father's biological mother." "Adoptive mother," she corrected gently. "His birth mother was a young woman who couldn't keep him. She gave him up when he was a baby, and my husband and I adopted him. We raised him until he was 6 years old. And then," she stopped, took a breath, and folded her hands in her lap. "And then your grandfather came and took him away." The rain outside picked up, drumming against the windows in a rhythm that felt almost like a huge beat. I sat in that armchair, surrounded by photographs of a father I recognized, and listened to Alice tell me the story I'd never been told. "He came with lawyers," she said. "That's the thing I remember most. I opened the door one afternoon, and there were 3 men in suits standing on my stoop. And behind them, in a black car, was your grandfather. He'd found out about my son, about what had happened to his birth mother, and he'd decided he wanted him back. He was your father's biological uncle, you see. The only surviving relative on that side. I tried to process this, tried to fit it into everything I already knew about my family. My father, the man who'd spent my entire childhood feeling like he'd never been good enough, the man who'd tried to steal my inheritance because he'd never gotten one of his own. He hadn't just been denied something. He'd been taken. I fought it, Alice said. I fought it with everything I had. But your grandfather was rich and I was poor, and he had the best lawyers in the city. They told me I had no claim because I'd only adopted him. That a 6-year-old should be with his blood relatives. They took him on a Friday afternoon, and I never saw him again. Until today, I said softly. Until today. She smiled, but it was a sad smile, the kind that comes from a lifetime of waiting. He doesn't know I exist. Your grandfather made sure of that. Told him his birth parents had died in an accident, told him I was just a woman who'd looked after him for a few years. Your father grew up thinking he had no one except the family your grandfather built for him. I thought about my father's face when he talked about his childhood. The way he always seemed to be searching for something, reaching for something, never quite finding it. The way he'd thrown himself into golf and money and success like they could fill a hole that was never meant to be filled. That he didn't know, I said. He didn't know any of this. He didn't. And I've spent 40 years wondering if I should have tried harder to find him. If I should have fought the courts again, fought the system, done something more than just sit here and hope that one day he'd come knocking on my door. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key. The one Lydia had given me, the one I'd been carrying around like a talisman for days. I held it up. Do you know what this opens? I asked. Alice's eyes widened. That's the key to the house in Pennsylvania, she said. The one your father grew up in. I kept it all these years, thinking maybe one day he'd want to see it again. I looked at the key in my hand, and everything clicked into place. My grandfather had given me Lydia's address to tell me about his lost love. My grandmother had given me Alice's address to tell me about my father's lost mother. And Alice had given me the key to a house I'd never known existed. They'd all been leading me somewhere. Someone. A chain of truth that connected every broken part of my family, every missing piece, every secret that had been buried for decades. Your grandfather knew, Alice said softly. He knew I was still here. He knew I'd want to meet you. And I think, she paused, her voice catching. I think he was trying to make it right. In his own way. I sat back in the armchair and read at the photographs on the wall. My father, at 6 years old, with a face that was still open and trusting, a face that hadn't yet learned to be bitter. My father, as a teenager, grinning at something off camera, already looking like the man I'd grown up with. My father, as a young adult, around a woman I didn't recognize, probably a girlfriend, probably someone before my mother. And then, tucked in the corner of a frame, a photograph I almost missed. It was small and faded, creased along one edge. In it, a man in a suit stood next to a woman in a floral dress, both of them holding a baby. The woman was Alice, younger and brighter, with the same reading glasses perched on her nose. The man was her husband, who I'd never met, who'd died before I was born. And the baby was my father. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting that matched the letters in my grandmother's folder, someone had written, our son. The day we brought him home. May he always know he is loved, I looked at Alice. She was crying now, silently, tears tracking down her cheeks and falling onto her sweater. I reached out and took her hand. Can I keep this? I asked. She nodded. I was hoping you'd ask. I spent the rest of the afternoon with her, listening to stories about my father that I'd never heard. The way he loved to run through the sprinklers in the backyard. The way he'd been terrified of dogs, but had pretended not to be. The way he'd asked, over and over, why he looked different from his parents, even though they'd always told him he was theirs, always, forever, no matter what. He was a good boy, Alice said. He was a good boy, and I loved him. I still love him. I've loved him every single day since they took him away. I thought about my father now. The way he'd screamed at me on the phone, the way he'd threatened to cut me out of his life, the way he'd spent his whole adult life chasing things that could never make him whole because he didn't even know what he was chasing. Can I bring him here? I asked suddenly. Can I bring him to meet you? Alice's eyes widened. You do that. I don't know if he'll come. I don't know if he'll even want to see me right now. But I can try. I squeezed her hand. He deserves to know the truth. He deserves to know he was loved, from the very beginning. She didn't say anything. She just pulled me into a hug, her arms wrapping around me like I was the child she'd lost all those years ago. I left Alice's apartment as the sun was setting, the photograph tucked into my pocket next to the key. I took the bus back to Manhattan, and then the subway, and I walked the rest of the way to my grandfather's building in the dark, the rain still falling, the city lights reflecting off the wet streets. When I got to the penthouse, my grandmother was waiting for me. She'd made dinner again, something edible this time, roasted chicken and vegetables, and she sat me down at the table before I could even take off my coat. How was she? She asked. Sad, I said. And lonely. And full of love for a son she hasn't seen in 40 years. My grandmother nodded slowly. I knew her, you know. Before any of this happened. She and I were friends, once. Before your grandfather took the boy and ruined everything. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was ashamed. She set down her fork. I was ashamed of what I'd let happen. I was ashamed that I'd stood by and watched him break her heart the same way he'd broken mine. And I was afraid that if you knew, you'd think I was just as bad as the rest of them. I looked at her for a long time. The woman who'd written me 60 letters and never sent them. The woman who'd flown 3,000 miles to apologize. The woman who'd been friends with Alice, once, before everything fell apart. You're not as bad as the rest of them, I said. None of you are. You're just people. People who made mistakes and hurt each other and didn't know how to fix it. She reached across the table and took my hand. Your father, she said. Do you know what you're going to do about him? I thought about the phone calls I'd ignored. The voicemails I'd deleted. The lawsuit I'd filed and the justice I'd demanded. He stole from me, I said. He stole from me for years. And I can't undo that. I can't pretend it didn't happen. But I think I understand why. I pulled the photograph out of my pocket and handed it to her. He never knew he was loved. He never knew he had a mother who wanted him, a family who didn't just see him as a tool or a disappointment. He grew up alone, even in a house full of people. My grandmother looked at the photograph, and I watched her face change. Soften. Crack, just a little, around the edges. I can't forgive him yet, I said. I don't know if I ever will. But I can try to understand him. And I can try to give him something he's never had before. I took the key out of my pocket and placed it on the table. Good choice. The call I'd been dreading for 2 weeks came on a Thursday morning. My father's name flashed across my phone screen while I was standing in the penthouse kitchen, my grandmother's homemade granola half-eaten on the counter, the rain still streaking the windows from the night before. That I almost didn't answer. I almost let it go to voicemail like the other 47 calls I'd ignored. But then I thought about the photograph in my pocket, the one of Alice and her husband holding a baby with my father's face. I thought about the key to the house he'd grown up in. I thought about all the secrets everyone had been keeping, and how they'd only made things worse. I answered. What? I said. Not angry. Just tired. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear my mother's voice in the background, muffled and tense, and my father's breathing, ragged and uneven. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than I remembered. Quieter. Thinner. Like someone had taken the bluster out of him and left only the bones. Ivy, he said. I need to see you. You can't just, please. That word stopped me. My father never said please. Not to me, not to anyone. He demanded and he expected and he took. But he never asked. I need to see you, he said again. Just you. No lawyers, no your mother. Just us. Can you do that? I looked at the penthouse around me. The half-empty rooms, the bare walls, the remnants of a life that was being dismantled piece by piece. I thought about the lawsuit, the evidence, the months of anger I'd been lying like a weight on my chest. When, I asked today. Right now. I'm in the lobby. I walked to the window and looked down. There he was, standing under the awning in a raincoat that was too thin for the weather, his hands shoved in his pockets, his shoulders hunched against the cold. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Smaller and older and more alone. Come up, I said. I'll buzz you. I opened the door and waited. The elevator took forever, each floor ticked off in agonizing slow motion. When it finally dinged and the doors slid open, my father stepped out like he was walking into a courtroom. His eyes scanned the penthouse, taking in the empty spaces where the art used to hang, the marks on the floor where the furniture had been dragged away, the ghost of everything he'd tried to steal. Your grandmother called me, he said. She said you found something. Someone. I closed the door behind him. She told you about Alice. He flinched at the name. So he'd known. On some level, he'd always known. She told me I had a mother, he said. A real mother. A woman who wanted me. He walked into the living room and stopped at the window, ring out at the city. She told me about the adoption. About the court case. About the way your grandfather took me away from her. I talked to her, I said. Alice. I went to her appointment yesterday. She's been waiting 40 years to see you. He turned around, and I saw the tears in his eyes. My father, who'd never cried in front of me. Who'd called me dramatic and emotional and too soft for the real world. He was crying now, silently, his face twisted with something that looked a lot like grief. 40 years, he repeated. She's been alive this whole time. And he told me she was dead. He told me I had no one. No one except him. He was trying to protect you, I said. Or maybe he was trying to protect himself. I don't know. I don't think it matters anymore. It matters, my father said. It matters because I spent my whole life thinking I was alone. Thinking I had to fight for everything because no one was ever going to give me anything. And it turns out, he stopped, his voice breaking. It turns out I had someone. All along. And I didn't even know. I walked toward him slowly, stopping a few feet away. You still have her, I said. She's still there. She still loves you. How do you know? Because I saw her. I talked to her. And she gave me this. I pulled the photograph out of my pocket and handed it to him. He read at it for a long moment, his fingers trembling as they traced the faces of the people who'd raised him. The people who loved him first. She called you her son, I said. She said you were a good boy. She said she's been thinking about you every single day. My father sank into the rest chair, the photograph still clutched in his hands. He was crying openly now, the kind of crying that came from somewhere deep and dark, somewhere he'd kept locked up for 40 years. I was so angry, he said. All those years. I was so angry at him. At your grandfather. For never believing in me, for never thinking I was good enough. And now I know, he took me away from my mother. He took me away from everything I could have had. He gave you a life, I said. He gave you money and opportunities and a name. He gave me nothing. My father's voice was sharp, bitter. He gave me a prison and called it a gift. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Because part of me knew he was right. My grandfather had tried to control everything, shape everyone, bend the world to his will. He'd hurt people. He'd hurt my father. He'd hurt my grandmother and Alice and everyone else who'd ever gotten close to him. But he'd also given me the truth. He'd given me the chance to build something new, something that wasn't built on secrets and lies. And I couldn't forget that, even if I couldn't forgive everything else. Dad, I said. The lawsuit. He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. Don't. Please. Don't do this to me, Ivy. Not now. Not after everything you've just told me. I don't want to destroy you, I said. I never wanted to destroy you. I wanted you to understand what you did to me. I wanted you to see that I wasn't just something you could use and discard. I know, Ivy. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've been sorry for years, even if I never said it. Is that supposed to be enough? No. He shook his head. No, it's not enough. It's never going to be enough. But I don't know what else to give you. I don't know how to make this right. I sat down across from him, the same dining room table where I'd signed the papers that root this whole thing. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up, all the anger I'd nursed like a wound, all the revenge I'd dreamed about. And I thought about Alice. About the house in Pennsylvania. About the key in my pocket. Come with me, I said. Today. Right now. I want to take you somewhere. He looked at me, confused. Where? Just come. Please. I need you to see something. We took the subway to Pennsylvania, 2 hours of silence and rattling trains and the landscape changing from city to suburb to countryside. My father didn't ask where we were going. He just followed me, like a child trailing a parent, trusting me in a way he'd never trusted anyone. The house was in a small town outside Philadelphia, a modest 2-story with a white picket fence and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. The key fit perfectly, just like Alice had said it would. When the door swung open, my father stopped breathing. The house was still intact. Alice had kept it up all these years, paying the taxes, maintaining the property, even when she'd moved to Queens to be closer to the city. The furniture was from another era, the kind of things that had been left behind when families moved on and didn't look back. But there were photographs everywhere. On the walls, on the shelves, in frames on every surface. Every single one was him at his first steps. His first day of school. His birthday parties, grinning and covered in cake. His soccer games, his summer vacations, his first day of high school. Alice had documented everything, even after he'd been taken away. She'd hired private investigators to send her photographs, to keep her updated, to let her watch him grow up from a distance. She never forgot you, I said softly. She never stopped loving you. Even when she couldn't be with you, she was always watching. My father walked through the house like he was walking through a dream. He touched the photographs, traced the faces of the parents he'd never gotten to grow up with. He opened a drawer in the kitchen and found a stack of letters, all addressed to him, all never sent. The first one was dated the week he'd been taken. It said, in Alice's ca refill handwriting, my dearest son, I am writing to tell you that I am thinking of you every day. I hope you are safe. I hope you are happy. I hope you know that I love you, The last one was dated last week. It said, my dearest son, I have waited 40 years to see you again. I hope that you will come home, My father turned to me, the letters clutched in his hands, and he didn't say anything. He just opened his arms and pulled me into a hug, the first hug he'd given me in years, maybe ever. A hug that wasn't about control or obligation or expectation. A hug that was just about being held. Thank you, he whispered against my hair. Thank you for finding her. Thank you for bringing me here. Thank Alice, I said. She's the one who never gave up. I will, he said. Tomorrow. I'll go see her tomorrow. We stayed in the house for hours, exploring every room, every corner, every piece of a life that had been stolen from him. When the sun set and the house grew dark, we sat on the porch swing and listened to the crickets and watched the stars come out. I don't deserve you, my father said. After everything I did, everything I took, you still brought me here. I didn't do it for you, I said. I did it for me. So I could look in the mirror and know I tried. So I could be the person I wanted to be, even when it was hard. He nodded slowly. What happens now? The lawsuit, your grandfather, all of it? I don't know, I said honestly. I think we figure it out as we go. I think we stop lying to each other and start talking. For real this time. He reached over and took my hand. I'll try, he said. I don't know if I know how, but I'll try. That's enough, I said. That's all I ever wanted. We drove back to the city that night, my father behind the wheel of a rental car, me in the passenger seat, the photograph of Alice and her baby tucked safely in my bag. The highway stretched ahead of us, dark and endless and full of possibilities. I thought about my grandfather, alone in his hospital bed, his plans and secrets and schemes finally laid bare. I thought about my grandmother, in the penthouse kitchen, making granola and trying to be the person she should have been all along. I thought about Alice, in her small apartment in Queens, waiting 40 years for a son who was finally coming home. And I thought about myself. The girl who'd stood in this same penthouse 3 weeks ago and watched her parents steal a painting that wasn't worth anything. The girl who'd signed a lawsuit and opened a folder and route a war she hadn't known she was fighting. I hadn't ended the war. Maybe I never would. But I'd sta root something else, something deeper and harder and more important. I'd sta root a family. Not the one I'd been born into, not the one I'd been angry at, but the one I'd built from the wreckage of everything that had come before. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all. If you've made it this far with Ivy, thank you. This story is about more than lawsuits and penthouse views. It's about the messy, complicated, beautiful work of figuring out who we are and who we want to be. If that resonates with you, hit subscribe. In the next chapter, we'll see Ivy's father walk through Alice's door for the first time in 40 years, and trust me, you're not going to want to miss what happens when he does. See you next week.